Hey guys, I'm the Coaster Keat, and we all see the world differently, don't we? I don't see the world the same way you see the world, the same way your brother, sister, relative of some sort sees the world. We all look through the world through these tinted glasses that are essentially invisible, and that is what we call our perspectives. Now, a lot of people I've found have one perspective or two perspectives, and they just kind of stick with those perspectives. And it's a lot easier to ignore the fact that you have a perspective when you just have one of them. It's a lot easier to notice to forget you have glasses if you just have one set of glasses, whereas if you have a million different sets that you constantly have to pick and choose from, you see them a lot more clearly. And I'm a person that likes to think that I have a lot of different perspectives because whenever I go out into the world, into different situations and scenarios, I see things in weird and messed up ways. It changes depending on where I just was. If I was just in a car, suddenly life is a highway. If I was just in a musical, suddenly everything could be a chance for a musical number. My perspectives just are in such flux all of the time that I just thought it would be fun to share a few, just a small few of the crazier kinds of perspectives that I take on in my everyday life all the time. So let's get into that. So the first one I just mentioned is the whole life is a highway perspective, or I'm constantly driving. And in this perspective, whenever I'm walking anywhere, everything is in terms of like what it would be like on a road. Now, keep in mind, I have never gone through a driver's test or any sort of thing. The only wheel I've ever been behind is a go-kart wheel. However, I have been told like various rules of the road. I know certain things about that, and that's usually what I'll go off of. So, for instance, I'm walking behind someone and they are going slow. Since we're in America, we're walking on the right side of the sidewalk, and I notice that there's a blink area to the left side of the sidewalk. But I also notice that there's a ton of people in the distance on that left side of the sidewalk that are coming the other direction. Now, in American system, you have the two-lane highway or whatever, and you can pass as long as no one is coming towards you, or as long as you think you can make it, or whatever. And so I will tend to use that exact same kind of logic. I will get over to the left lane, and then I will go back in front of the right lane once I've passed them, successfully completing my pass. Instead of doing something like, I don't know, walking up straight to them or going off of the road to try and get around them, though I will do these things if the passing scenario isn't open for whatever reason. I'll also commonly have things where I'll be walking up to a group of people, like I'll be walking up to an intersection and a group of people is coming, and I will mentally start doing these little calculations that I don't even know how I do them, but I'll be like, yeah, I can make that, and then I'll go, or I don't think I can make that, and then I'll have to hang behind or slow myself down. And I have this effective braking system, I don't know, where I will just be walking and then I'll see that people are coming, but if I brake a little bit, I'll be able to keep going. So I'll just, slow my pace just a tiny bit to let them pass, and then the second I get past, I'll go full speed again. It's a very bizarre type of thing, but I constantly feel it. And it's also that the road rage that you would get if you were in a traffic jam, I get when there's a ton of people that are all standing side by side for some reason, walking very slowly in front of me. I get a little bit of the road rage when I'm on the sidewalk, which is a little bit ridiculous, but that's one of the perspectives that I have. Another perspective that I'll take on, especially after I've seen a musical, a movie, when I've played D&D, sometimes when I have an especially crazy dream, is the kind of fantastic perspective on everything. And this is a perspective where you look and you see someone, I don't know, on their phone alone. And instead of being like, oh yeah, they're probably just an introvert, I would know the first thing about introverts, so that makes sense. You suddenly go, what if they were just outcast from their friend group? What if they just need someone to go up there, reach out a hand, and be their friend? What if they just need a kind word, and I can go up and be the protagonist of their story, or whatever? And so this kind of perspective will just keep making everything so much bigger than it needs to be. It's also the perspective where it's like, oh, that sparrow landed right next to me. I must be the chosen one. Or, oh, I got this message from my professor. Like, what does it mean? It's constantly looking for these kind of fantastic elements behind each and everything. And it also blows up any moments that are emotional in any way at all into huge things. So if like someone gets you a gift, then suddenly it's a big deal. If someone hates you, then you must have ruined their life. And it's kind of this, it is a very odd sort of blown up perspective, very romanticized in a way. Moving on, we have the kind of ethical standpoint, and I'll get this one a lot coming from bioethics, as you would expect, and also when I'm just coming from a serious discussion, or my mind wanders to these topics. And the ethical perspective is when you think that everything has a cause and a reaction, and that everything is intentional. So it's kind of like the other one in a way, because it blows things up a little bit. Someone cuts in front of you, then they must not like you. Or you can also take the perspective, oh, they must be, being late to their class, and so they need to get there more than I do. It's kind of a perspective where you start thinking about everything, and honestly, it's less about emotion, it's more about rationale. It's the kind of perspective that allows you to understand why people do bad things, and to overthink why people do good things. Whereas in the musical romantic version, bad things were blown up in horrible ways, but good things were also made super good. In the kind of ethical standpoint, bad things are fine, they're understandable, but good things, those suddenly become so much less important and beautiful because there's just a rationale behind it. It's like, oh, someone got me a gift, they must be trying to get on my good side. That sort of thing. That's the kind of ethical perspective that you take, and it's also can be a very inhuman one sometimes when you start thinking about issues, because it puts the facts before the feelings. So when you start thinking about scenarios like if you had to divert a train and on one side there's 3 random strangers and on the other there's 2 people, the ethical perspective would say just take out the 2 people instead of the 3. And it doesn't matter who those 2 people are. In the ethical standpoint, it could be your family members, and that wouldn't make a difference. The only way it would make a difference is if they had the possibility of saving more lives and therefore having more value. So that's the kind of ethical perspective. Then you have the kind of scientific perspective, is what I'm going to call it. Scientific academic perspective. This is the perspective I most commonly have when I get out of my class of any sort, and it's essentially that everything is a problem that needs to be solved in such a way that let's say I'm cutting a piece of meat or something, and then suddenly my utensil veers and hits something, and it goes launching through the air. Well, the science perspective will be the one that's like, at what velocity must I have hit that thing for it to go that far and that distance and that angle, and how did I do that, and how likely was that to happen, and etc., etc., etc. And it just keeps going. And this perspective, it's usually enhanced if I just had the class, because then I actually know how to like reason it out and figure it out. But it stays with me forever. So I have a physics class last semester. Well, I still kind of remember the general concepts, so I'll still go through all those concepts in my head in this very weird way. It also works with things like genetics, of course. I see an animal and I start thinking about, oh, that sparrow must have had a natural selection advantage because it's here, whereas its other sparrow ancestors aren't here. Or you can even think of, like, from a mathematical perspective, you can think of a policy perspective. All of these are the kind of academic perspectives, and the more that I learn about them, the more detailed they get, and the closer they get to actually allowing for actual solutions, which is the craziest part, because ultimately this very odd mindset that I get into could actually lead to me being able to write down all this information and, do all the calculations and then be like, yes, this is the answer to that problem. So it's a very bizarre mindset, one that I think has been instilled in me by our American education system, but it works. Then comes the kind of antithesis to that mindset, which is the sports athletic mindset. And this is one that, instead of focusing on what's happening around you, kind of focuses on what you can do. For me, it's a mindset of, I see a wall with various things on it, and I start thinking, oh, if I did this and this and this, I could climb the wall. My parents can attest to this mindset, because when I was a very little kid, I would climb almost anything, just because I could. And this is the mindset that kind of pits your situation and your surroundings against your own ability. And it kind of weighs the chances, and it also ends up having to, of course, weigh, can you survive? And then it makes a decision. This is the kind of mindset I think that a lot of gamers get stuck in, like after they've played a game like Breath of the Wild or Skyrim, where you're running around and climbing mountains, etc. And then suddenly you get into the real world and you start passing mountains on your drive into work, and you're like, I could climb that. I could do that. And it's just this, and again, all of these mindsets are bizarre, but this one in particular, it's kind of like a bullet time analysis of all of the facets of all of the walls and stuff, and then you start thinking about, oh yes, I could do this, and these would be the steps for me to succeed at that random task that I just assigned myself. This perspective also comes way in handy in water polo, but the strange thing about it is you can't think too much about it, because the moment you start thinking, it kind of gets overridden. So it's a very natural sort of response, and it will lead you to the right solution, at least in athletic events, probably not in day-to-day life. So if you're an adult like me, maybe you shouldn't go climb the filing cabinet thing, even if you know you could. It's probably not going to be very good for your career. And then finally we have, of course, the YouTube perspective, and I thought about excluding this one, but it's a YouTube video, I have to include it. So whenever I'll watch a ton of YouTube videos, I will suddenly, whatever ideas were in those videos, I will suddenly be on the lookout for in real life. And this has happened a lot with the Unus Honest channel that has been put out recently. Just the overlap has been ridiculous. And honestly, this perspective also works for, movies, TV shows, etc. It's just kind of the perspective that everything is just like the thing you just saw, and you can't stop making these infinite connections. And you see a person and the way they walk, and the way they walk is just like the way that person walked, or a person starts talking about something, and the way that they are talking about it and the method in their thought is exactly the same as the way this YouTuber thought, and it's like just infinite connections to everything. And that's probably the perspective I have most often, is the kind of connections perspective, I guess would be a better term for it. And although I get it a lot from YouTube, it really is with everything. It's just kind of the perspective that you start thinking about one thing and then that leads to another, and then everything can just end up in this very convoluted sort of web of ideas, but it can all somehow get connected. It doesn't matter how many millions of connections it takes to get there, you can connect it. And that is my dominant perspective, I would say. Just thinking about connections and all of that. And yeah, so anyways, that just goes ahead and wraps up all of these ideas on perspectives. If you have a weird perspective on life or some weird way of seeing things, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. I'm sure there's someone that could relate to some aspect of it, or if we can't, then it would just be cool to hear it, because making these things up is not possible. You have to really experience them in order to feel them. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope that you all soar high and enjoy your ride of life. Bye!